Dear listeners, welcome to the podcast about unveiling hate speech, which is founded by Friedrich Naumann Stiftung and scientifically supervised by the Peace Journalism Laboratory at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, Greece. The University of Pristina Journalism Department is a research partner at this project and is conducting the report for Kosovo. My name is Yeta Bazri from Journalism Department as well. My guest today is Valon Sylla. Valon Sylla has more than 24 years of experience in journalism, and he had been working for important media. For example, his experience include working for the newspaper Coaditore. He was a co-founder of Gazeta Express, most readable newspaper, and he was a co-founder of public broadcaster TV Clan Kosovo, as well a very prestigious TV station, and Watch TV as well. He presented himself as a publicist working for Metro Media Group, as well as anti-populist, anti-dogmatic, and anti-grnac. That's a special word in Albanian. His biography says. In Kosovo, Mr. Sylla is seen as a public figure that actively engaged in media debates and report on sensitive topics related to politics, politicians, and religious affairs. The media have written about his profile, highlighting his unique form of sarcasm and ability to cite historical references, his body language, tone, and capacity to imitate in order to make a point adds to his arguments. On social media, Mr. Sylla has around 5,000 people who follow him. Mr. Sylla has encountered hated speech as well as was assaulted physically for his views. In the internet search today, among the inquiries concerning him are: do you know Sylla's father? Are you aware of his atheism? Such initiatives to contest his professional credibility by raising doubts about his persona and background are attempts to delegitimize his work. Thank you for your presence, Valon. Please introduce yourself and why did you want to be a journalist?
Well, first of all, we are living in Kosovo here. We are having a flu season for which I'm sorry that my voice has different colors today.
Not that I presented, okay.
I joined journalism during the war. My idea as a young journalist was that joining media, I can change things and make things better, for which at my first media training, I understood that for changing things, you have to be a politician and not a journalist. And after this, being a journalist, it's only to transmit parts of objective truths, for which it doesn't mean that the truth and objective truth and reporting can change things at the end of the day. I joined the most prestigious and independent media group at that time. It was Coaditore. And it was, one of my earliest decisions about my profession, for which working long time in media made me become a journalist and leaving my, youth passions. But I was a musician, guitar player for 16 years, rock, funk, dirty funk guitar player. And I had a huge passion in my education in history, medieval history, for which made me be a kind of, expert in the region, especially region of Balkans, knowing the history of Albanian Greeks, Serbs and Bulgarians, for which then it helped me during my reporting and when I was a correspondent in main Balkan capital cities as Belgrade and Tirana and such like that. Then I had around 15 years of media experience. So for me, it was too late to go back to my old passions. And I invested so a huge time on media, journalism and reporting, for which then it became the biggest, work that could pay me. So I couldn't leave it anymore. So here I am, 25 years, contracted as a media worker, journalist, director of media, main political commentator in primetime TV debates and so on.
Thank you for being with us. Could you please speak about the importance of humor in interpretative journalism? Why do we need that?
Humor. I think Americans have a saying when they say humor is a serious business. I analyze the work of my colleagues and how media is evolving, especially in this digital time era, where old-timer speeches, objective reporting without any colors, it sounds like boring to many people. It has to be something special, and adding some of the humor flavor in all of this reporting makes it more interesting. And I think today, in this, let's say, digital era, it is very important to be interesting. For example, if we look at the famous campaigns in elections everywhere in the world, candidates that win elections today are not the smartest one, or not the most, most promising ones, but are the people who win elections today are the most interesting ones. So if we look at the elections at the United States, for example, we can see that many, political candidates were much smarter than Trump, but Trump was much more interesting, so he won elections. And that we can see in Greece, Albania, Serbia, France, and many countries in Europe, for which made me think that if we decide to speak and say something, we have to give some interesting flavors. So I choose a humor and sarcasm to add a little bit of spice to all of it, so to make it interesting, so it could have a bigger impact.
I'm using your word, the digital market. What do you aim to achieve with your public appearances? You've so far touched this topic, but what do you exactly want?
My aim in all my work is to fight the heritage that we got from Sovietic, education and system, for which in our society was introduced by Serbia, for which we lived under occupation for many years, and social Yugoslavia that educated generations and generations for 40, 50 years. And many of these dogmatic way of thinking, dogmatic educations.
That's what your profile says as well.
I started to tackle this kind of, first of all, vocabulary, change the language that they speak, which is a very official language.
Connotations as well.
Connotations. And my aim was to liberate public discourse. And in some aspects, I believe I have achieved it. For example, we have a lot of traditional dogmatic discourse in political life, religious influence as well. Here I'm speaking for Islamic influence much more than other. Old communist discourse of describing problems and trying to give options for and solving, formulas. So this is how I started. I started to liberate a little bit the public opinion by adding myself to that, fighting for that, and giving a liberal flavor to all these main topics that were spoken in Pristina and Kosovo. So people could see a different arguments, different side, and don't be scared to open up and see things as they are, and where we want to integrate, such as EU and things like that, and not going back and take off the fear of public discourse for that I think is still one of the main reasons of saving this, how to say, these communist Yugoslav Sovietic traditions and go on.
It seemed like you deconstructed this narrative, these cliches, but you did mention some politicians. While politicians aim to get more votes, and while musicians or rock music, which you have been listened to, they want people to listen to their tunes. What goals do you have in mind? Although I'm not questioning your objectives, but I would like to know, who is your audience, Mr. Sula?
Well, my audience is, how to say, people with liberal, how to say, thinking. There are many, for example, we have a lot of activists, social activists and NGOs who work today, which have false and, how to say, very false, well, old-fashioned way of trying to impose new way of thinking. For example, like feminist groups, which, in fact, they don't understand the equality, equity of societies, but they want to impose a kind of 19th century feminist, how to say, a feminist fascism maybe, or something like that, which is very hard to
Which is not about equality, but it's about dominance.
It is dominance. Then it is a very old, how to say, a dogma invented in New York and in other main capitals of West world. And today it's a different matter. Today we have to think about equality, about human rights, to save some parts of a normal life for which many times this kind of feminist group, for example, they took an example, they try to de-evaluate and to impose a kind of weird, very artificial fight for some rights for which are much more, how to say, presence. Presence, eu integru-se po.
Okay. Excluded?
Yeah.
Okay.
Many right things that they are trying to make their point, they much more exclude parts of society than they integrate. And this happens with feminism, for example. And then we have the same organized groups in politics who do the same.
Radical groups.
In religious influence groups, Islamic religious influence groups as well. So this is how it is, and this is how we see it goes.
Sometimes for man, even saying that it requires courageous. You have the audacity to mock religious hierarchy, disparage the precedent, and make fun of the Albanian diaspora. Does that imply that you're a courageous public figure, or does that imply that there is a media freedom in Kosovo? Which one applies?
I think there are both. First of all, I'm an experienced journalist in Kosovo. Like we said at the beginning of this podcast, that 25 years working with journalists, I was their editor, and I trained many of young generation journalists. So they had respect for me. So when I started a different political fight in discourse, with arguments, with some humor and things like that, they reported about that. So I had a huge media support for what I said, and this is part of free media in Kosovo, for which are, I think, the most free sector in all Balkans, and this is because of huge investment of Western donors, international community trainings, and international presence, for which media achieved to gain their freedom, and journalists fight for that freedom. But many times then we see political groups, interest groups who get involved to the media, use this kind of freedom for their own agendas, and these are like huge economic companies, Islamic, for example, political parties which introduce their fundamental kind of extreme point of view, for which today we have many radios who are funded by these kind of groups. Like Kosovo has 34 municipalities, and in majority of them you can hear that kind of radio station that suppose. Then you have, of course, extreme left-wing groups, how to say, allocation groups, anti-privatization, anti-free speech, anti-free market, and
anti-West, anti-NATO, anti-United States.
Yes, and we are still in a kind of transition area that we are fighting and, how to say, trying to pass this, how to say, this part of our society that many countries in Balkans have already passed. For example, in Romania, there was a dictator like Ceausescu. For them it was simple. When Ceausescu died, got killed, he was murdered. Then in Romania and Bucharest, transition simply started. In Kosovo it was different because we didn't have that kind of figure like Ceausescu, who was a hated communist person who was the main kind of address for all problems that we had. At us, we were a country under occupation. We had a different kind of leader who was loved, and he lived. And after liberation, it created a political myth that Ibrahim Rugova in this case, will solve all our problems, will get our independence done, democratization of society,
in a peace manner,
transition in a peace manner. And Ibrahim Rugova, I think, was the first, how to say, political myth. Second was the chief politician of Liberation Army, Hashim Thaçi, who came after Ibrahim Rugova died. And he was the second myth because he was seen as a figure who is going to solve all these problems. And after he got arrested for war crimes, today he's in Hague, a special process and tribunal who deals with the war crimes. After him then being arrested, a very left-wing extremist populist movement named Vendosia it was made possible that he won elections, and he most basically is the third myth of all these transition period in Kosovo and Pristina, who people today believe that he's going to solve all the things like problems with negotiations in Brussels with Serbia, having a peace agreement with them, and then all the corrupted people he's going to throw in jail and things like this, for which it's none of them are true, because the only person during the 3 years of his government who was jailed and who was in prison is a guy who is a kind of, how to say, we call him Burdushi. He's like
a special character to Kosovo.
A special character to Kosovo. He's like a fake psychologist who deals with fortune seeing.
Use magic for healing problems.
He pretends that he uses magic to heal different human problems, especially woman problems in Prizren, which is an old and, how to say, one of the main capital cities of Kosovo used to be. So he was the only figure who got in prison. No huge businessmen, no oligarch as he used to call or something like this. So he found a fortune seer. So he was a kind of seer. He got in prison and nobody else. So I think in all this process, which I call transition, I think this transition will end with Albin Kurti's reign, and Kosovo society then for them will be much easier after this transition ends to see the real needs. They will vote for different kind of leaders, more technocrats than myth kind of figures that they used to want and to see in, how to say, old past elections. And after this end, Kosovo, I think, would be much more mature in social level, and then would see many other reasons that we need to see much better, much clearer to get integrated to EU and such on. So all my speech and my involvement in public discourse, public opinion, was to make it easy for this transition to happen, to help kill these myths which we didn't need. And my style of speaking, my style of involvement, it's a part of this, how to say, transition, to make it easy to pass, better to understand, and of course to be a little bit interesting during all this painful, how to say, social transition.
I was a bit concerned that it's sad not to see your sarcasm in English as it would have been in Albanian.
Yeah.
But how do you think, in your opinion, can hate speech in Kosovo be combated? Or can we combat hate speech in Kosovo?
Hate speech is during the history of European nations, hate was always part of our history. It's a humankind problem in every kind of society, in every kind of historical period. But it is transmitted in different way of views. We know what, during the Middle Ages, what church and papacy did. We know how religion used hate speech to achieve its aims during all human, how to say, building societies in Europe. Let's say the same as empires, like Byzantine Empire, Ottoman Empire, Roman Empire. They all use hate as an instrument, which is the main instrument of how it is called in English, the main instrument of demagogy. So demagogy has to have a big public enemy for them to survive. And hate is the main, how to say, tool to achieve it. For example, if we look back at socialists, extremists, socialist and communist revolution in Moscow, for example, all the wealthy class was the target and main, how to say, enemy of society in their political discourse and propaganda.
They needed an enemy.
So they invested in hate to explain a complicated story that wealthy class is responsible for all our problems in Russian society. If we see Nazis in Germany, they propagated that the Hebrew Jew community is the main responsible community for German problems. So they invested in hate, demagogy, and provided a huge human, biggest war crime ever happened.
So we cannot combat it.
But it was combated, and both systems that I mentioned, they lost historically. We know how Bolsheviks ended and how Nazis also, what was their finish. And today in Kosovo, of course, we have this hate speech involved, but in a different agenda, different technology, for which it's interesting to analyze. For example, it's a digital era of media that is very cheap today to open a web page, a Facebook page, fan page, and start using hate speech with very less money, low investment to push a different kind of a special agenda. But this kind of, how to say, digital technology have caught all European states in kind of surprise, like we saw what happened in French society and in Balkans and in America with populism and everything. And all societies were unprepared for such a technological revolution, digital revolution. And how it should be tackled, I think we should first see it with laws. Parliaments, journalists association, media people, owners, civic society have to come together first to draft new laws that could make internet and social media be more monitored, like the
We are slowly coming to that question.
Yeah, mainstream media. This is one part. The second part is education. Third part is of course these social groups that need to sue these people at the court. Journalists Association needs to make sure that this is a hate speech is not part of the right thing. And I think this will take time, but at the end, one day, internet, social media will come to a place like today we see radio, TV, and we used to see newspaper as a first form of media. So it will become mainstream technology for us. And it then, with these kind of laws, education, training, I believe that it will not exist in such a high level as it exists now. But hate speech is part of human society, which every day has to be fought, every day has to be tackled, because it will grow up as it grew many times in our society where we were not aware.
So in a way, you're saying that the hate speech, although punished by the law, it can be combated, but it's an ongoing process. You somehow tackled this issue of internet growth. And my question is, do you think that, or has work become more challenging as a result of internet's growth and the unregulated character of online media? And how does hate speech manifest differently online compared to maybe traditional media or offline media, or to before, because you have worked yourself in traditional media?
Well, every group has invested in its own agendas. For example, political group with extremist views, they funded different kind of pages, media, people, and used social media to attack them. For example, first attack is to discredit all the people who they see as of enemies of their agenda. Was it a political or religious or no matter what kind of interest group, they first discredit that. Then they try to, to find a very complex problem, to introduce it as it has to be only one thing, only one little decision to solve this problem. And usually that is done by funding many groups which work in internet, like 20, 30 people in one group, for which young people who work like 8 hours a day to comment on somebody's pages, and to write different kind of things, who have a boss, and this kind of boss, it works like an editor for them, feeding them with hate speech, with false news and such, so they can every day do to achieve their work. This is very high in Kosovo society, and we have two main groups who do this, and these groups are Islamic fundamentalist groups who fund and have a lot of money from abroad. Usually it used to come from Middle East, and latest reports say that this money comes from from Russian part of groups for which they fund, in Balkans especially, Islamic movement and extremist left-wing movements to tackle their own interest in their agenda, which is anti-liberal concepts and such things. So the main issue how they do it is they invest in this kind of group who sound like a social media army, maybe, who fight everyday things. But we don't have a law who can stop these pages. It is very hard to put them on our courts every day, so they continue working and they continue accumulating hate. And this is very hard to tackle because our how to say courts that we have that we inherited from old socialist systems work very slow. And for example, for such a work, it takes 1 year to 2 years to solve, and usually every 2 years we have elections. Every 2 years we have or local or national elections by our law, so it becomes very, very slow to react. So this is why we still have this kind of problems, and which makes it harder to tackle.
With your personal experience, what are the potential consequences of hate speech on individuals and community? In Kosovo's case, we mentioned the question of religion, but Kosovo is a strict secular country, but is a state that has diverse ethnic and religious community. So what are the consequences on that?
Consequences are that it makes society be frightened. Like hate speech that they use, techniques that they use in social media basically provide and produce fear. And fear is the main feeder of religion points of view and, dogmatic, populist, extreme political parties' point of view. So their tendency is to produce fear. And they use this fear to shut up the political debate. They use this fear to feed up and hate, free people, free thinking, free groups, and the main, thing that they want is to stop people be critical, to stop thinking, to be frightened, to open up, so they can achieve their, old thinking, old way agendas, like they are religious ones and political ones. So basically, fear is what they impose, what they produce to stop all the progressive thoughts and movements work. And this, they have been successful in many types. Like 20 years ago, all Kosovo firms have been part, for example, all companies have been part of, public fiestas. We celebrated New Year, we celebrated Bayram, we celebrated Christmas, things like this. The Kosovo companies and Kosovo state companies, and mostly private ones, they, for example, funded fiestas, like a Bayram party, or a New Year's party, or a Christmas party. But we never had funded a fiesta like Ramadan party, for which is very new in our society.
Yeah.
So it was first time 2 years ago that I got maybe more than 20 invitations to a Ramadan party and iftar dinner, for which was traditional for those who was religious to do that with their own families and friends. and it was a very private kind of religious fiesta, but it never was public. So the last 2 years, I see it as a part where all companies organize a special iftar dinner and Ramadan party or fiesta, I would say, to call different people. And if you don't do that, then you're not a good person to do business in the society. And this is what this hate and this dogmatic fight in social media achieved, for example. So this was achieved by saying, "Oh, you didn't pay for iftar dinner for the Muslim brothers who are fasted." And this is what happened. And I started to write and say, when did you organize these kind of things, or when has started to be measured to be a good Muslim religious person if you don't invest that thing. So they try to create a trend for everybody to uniform the society, and now everybody doesn't want to lose business, doesn't want to lose clients. So, and credibility in society, in the, how to say, credibility, like wanted false credibility in social media. And they don't want to risk. And when people don't want to risk, that is production of fear that we spoke. So basically, this is what happens. And now today, we are seeing different. So we can also see different things that change in our society, like Halloween, for example. We had a huge international community here. Halloween was, last 20 years, was introduced as an international, not say, fiesta for children. A lot of movies, Hollywood and things like this. So children like Halloween. They want to scare different child friends and like that. And this year I noticed a huge fight for Halloween, because the religious groups, for example, today see Halloween as a pagan religion for which their rightful, very moral children should not take part. And this happens especially when they organize parties, when they put only Arabic music as a sign of fighting Halloween, or they behave very badly with children who come to your door and ask for tweets for Halloween, and they start to make problems in school when they do this, and they impose fear in such aspect, for which in society you just see a demoralized society that accepts everything slowly, just to don't have problems. So only thing to tackle this is to be active every day in such matters, and start being acting every day in such matters, to don't let this huge produce of hate, of lies in social media to take off the normal people who just get influenced, and they are not even aware that it's also their part to take part in this everyday battle against this all kinds of things.
So, Mr. Sula, you somehow talked about the changing of what it remained a celebration in a public sphere, which before celebration of ending of fasting of Ramadan, Islamic celebration would be in private homes, and this switching in public is in a very demonstrative way. And any other kind of celebration which is not religious, as it would take the example with Halloween, which is very much commercialized, and they do tackle this in order to make it as otherness and not applicable to the case of Kosovo. But do you think that in a way this way of hate speech then intersect with other forms of discrimination, such as racism, such as sexism, such as homophobia, Islamophobia in Kosovo?
Yes, of course, but when you analyze all the movements, they kind of become one because they are all at the end populist. So we have a political, very extremist leftist movement which today won elections in Kosovo and has formed a government which is Vedran Dosti and Albin Kurti. But also we see all these kind of hate groups who join this populist movement. And at the end, you see that their aim is to gain power and be part of a government. So all this is, it's just a tool to achieve this. So it's very. Then you see a very weird kind of combination of political party where, like, racists are together with communists, and communists and racists are together with fundamentalist groups. It is something similar that happened maybe in Afghanistan, when you see a Marxist-Leninist group who merges with a very Islamic 6th century way of thinking fundamental group. And they both, when they get together and merge, they form what? They form Taliban, which is a very different, military and paramilitary structure in Afghanistan than in other Islamic worlds, because Arabs don't have Taliban, they have different groups. Somebody has a different group, but only you can see how these populist movements, anti-freedom movements, like communism merges with Islam and produces something. So here they produce the political party which is dogmatic and is populist and is demagogic. So they didn't produce a special, group to call, but they started up now to have problems because, of course, all this is very artificial and cannot be merged. And these groups for a long time couldn't be in part. They didn't have a chance. They couldn't be part of any government power. So now they see that through this they can gain some power, take what they want, and push forward some of their agenda and interest and go on. And at the end, I think people notice this, but media, political activists, journalists, should be aware and make sure that these movements, these kind of things, get published, have courage to fight them every day, and they will pass. Like in Greece, they had a movement, extremist leftist movement like Syriza, communist one, who changed to modern propaganda things in social media. So they got a kind of mini revolution in Athens. But today they are 24% and not part of government for the last 8 years, because they achieved to come in a government, create a group, but at the end they cannot merge them with international community like EU, free market policies and things like this, and people see it and they get lost or get reduced after 6 to 8 years. So basically, I think all this that we are seeing today as a huge hate speech raise in our societies has to do with technological revolution, and that's the main thing. Because in radio and TV, there are rules that you cannot, invite every kind of guest. You journalists are educated, and of course they speak with credible and competent parts of our societies. And internet, no, everybody can say everything, and that's it.
So we're coming to our last question. You did mention the involvement of Russia, and for example, there have been reports on how Russia has used instruments of, for example, making Kosovo as having conflicts between Serbs and Albanians. But you did also mention the question of abusing the religion in the case of Kosovo. Do you have other specifics about hate speech in Kosovo, or you have already mentioned these?
Basically in Kosovo, to round it up then, basically in Kosovo we have two big groups who organize hate speech in a very organized type of way, in social media mostly. That is left extremist groups, as Vendosia, who is organized here in Kosovo and abroad in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, where Albanian diaspora lives, and Islamic groups who are fundamentalist movements of very narrow, fanatic religious points of view, who use this kind of social media to spread fear and raise Islam and put Islam as a, stakeholder in society, especially in political life, for which it wasn't used to be during the last 60 years. So these are two main groups. So we see then different foundations and groups who get involved in this, like Russians investing kind of these already existing groups to achieve their own interest or to expand the conflict in every society. So they are now in war, but they did it then before their war with Ukraine. And you have, for example, states like Iran, who also finance groups to create, huge differences in society, for which they think that one day they might produce a conflict, for which they are interested that conflict should be here, somewhere in Balkans, and not get close to their border there in the Middle East. So they need conflict and international community to get involved, very much involved in Europe somewhere, in Balkans somewhere, where Serbs and Albanians fight. So international community would not then have the energy to deal with problems in Middle East or Ukraine and Russia. So basically, their finances are this, so they use these kind of groups. For example, the biggest example that we noticed is that when war started now in Gaza, pacifying Gaza from Israel, all the groups that supported this Islamic and extreme leftist group and government groups who supported this kind of leader that we have, Albin Kurti, Kosovo Prime Minister, who does not have very good relations with United States, does not have at all good relations with Brussels and EU. Kosovo today is under sanctions because of his actions, political sanctions. All these groups in the internet who supported Albin Kurti, it is very interesting how one night they all became groups friendly to Hamas, and their reactions with the rocket against Israel.
Within the night?
So now even the people who were pro-Kosovo government were surprised. How come now, like all these groups that in internet sounds like a huge army and everybody is thinking the same and hating the same and fighting the same, for one night they become Hamas? It is simple because these groups that they started then just got the support from other groups that were funded. So they, for one night, became one. And there you can see the investment, money, for which, of course, people who work with intelligence, experienced journalists and all of this, also people in politics see and analyze how it did happen. And I think this is a transitional part that we spoke at the very beginning. As we have political, social transitions, we have also digital transitions and technological transitions that we have to get used now. How slowly internet one day and social media will become a mainstream media, and then things would be as they used to be when radio got invented. People said, it was before the First World War, people said, devil is speaking from a box. Then TV got invented, and they say how all this magic of illusion is a masterpiece of lies too. But now we see that TV is a mainstream media, it's nothing special anymore. But now the devil speaks from the box of social media, and illusion comes from internet, so we have to make it mainstream media by laws, by creating it as being part of our society, by educating the journalists, and that is it. And hate is a different kind, it's an educational effort mostly, which has to be every day present in our schools, universities and such, so it can pass. We have to fight during this transition so we can go back there when we started and make it all normal to progress.
A huge thank you to our guest Valan Sylla for his valuable insights and expertise on hate speech against journalists. By understanding this issue and working towards potential solutions, we can create a more supportive environment for journalists and strengthen the role of a free and independent press in our society. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Unveiling Hate Speech used in the case of Kosovo. Thank you very much.